We now proceed later than usual, and our apologies to everyone. To Leader's questions under Standing Order 36. Deputy Mary Lou McDonald, please.
Thank you, Gurmagat Count Corla Taoiseach. More than 11,000 patients waited on hospital trolleys last month. University Hospital Limerick again had the highest figure of any hospital in the state, closely followed by University Hospital Galway. The trolley crisis is now a year-round emergency. Our hospitals are under enormous and sustained pressure. Yesterday, Minister Donnelly announced that a HSE support team is to be deployed to University Hospital Limerick. Taoiseach, this is a hospital in a state of constant crisis, with an emergency department pushed to the brink every single day. So, Taoiseach, a HSE support team is welcome, but it is a drop in the ocean when it comes to what University Hospital Limerick needs, and it won't alter that hospital's needs. The hospital needs 288 extra beds. It needs to hire 200 vital staff, including 20 emergency department nurses, and the hospital needs you to lift the recruitment embargo immediately. This embargo is very dangerous. The system is at breaking point, and yet your government, with eyes wide open, is choosing to block the hiring of healthcare staff. By imposing and maintaining this embargo, you have chosen to make a bad situation worse. The consequences of your embargo are felt right across the health system. The embargo has consequences for stroke victims. The head of the National Stroke Programme, Professor Ronan Collins, has said that they are no longer able to adequately staff stroke units, that 1 in 3 stroke victims don't get into a stroke unit bed, and that stroke patients are getting less than half of the recommended therapy time. It has consequences for those in need of mental health care. You keep this embargo in place when the psychiatric care system has now 700 vacancies. Peter Hughes, the General Secretary of the Psychiatric Nurses Association, has said that the recruitment embargo is seriously impacting the delivery of services, especially services for children and adolescents, and it doesn't stop there. Radiographers and radiotherapists can't be hired to deliver the National Cancer Strategy. The HSE, as you know, had sought an additional €20 million to deliver this strategy this year. How much did you give them? 0. Public dentists can't be hired. That means 100,000 children aren't getting the dental treatment they need. Multidisciplinary teams needed to treat patients at home, in nursing homes and in community care settings can't be hired. They are understaffed and under huge pressure. And I could go on and on, Taoiseach. Your recruitment embargo is layering crisis on crisis. And while you refuse to directly employ the healthcare professionals our system needs, you're spending a fortune on hiring agency staff. Government spending in this area has more than doubled to €650 million. You couldn't make this up. Under this government, young doctors, nurses and healthcare professionals are being educated and trained to emigrate. The message sent to those who have already left is not to come back, even though we need them now more than ever. A Taoiseach Tá Cusk atá agat arceacht sa téirbhí sláinte chun dúirteach, tá impactaí trom cúiseach aga de othair, caithfí tú fáil ré leis go beo. Taoiseach, I've outlined for you the very real consequences of your recruitment embargo. It was wrong to impose the embargo in the first place. To keep it in place is now counterproductive, damaging and dangerous. So I'm asking you to scrap it immediately. I'm asking you to allow our health services to hire the staff that it so desperately needs.
Thank you, Deputy McDonald. Taoiseach, please.
Well, thanks very much, Count Corla, and thank you to Deputy McDonald for raising important issues in relation in relation to our health service. You've touched on a number of topics and made a point in relation to recruitment, which I want to respond to as well. Firstly, in relation to the University Hospital Limerick, which you began by referencing, I too welcome the decision by the Minister for Health and the HSE Chief Executive yesterday to send a specific support team to Limerick to help deal with the current pressures that are being experienced in that hospital and in the Midwest region more generally. This team will begin its work immediately, and over the next 4 weeks it will help devise a number of actions to ease overcrowding and pressures that are being experienced in the University of Hospital Limerick. The team is made up of Ms Grace Rothwell, a National Director, Ms Orla Kavanagh, Director of Nursing and Integration at Waterford University Hospital, and a very eminent and I think respected by people right across this House, the retired emergency medicine consultant, Dr Fergal Hickey from Sligo. The team will work with the team in place there to manage patient flow and to de-escalate the current pressures being experienced. And the reason we're doing that, Deputy McDonald, is that we acknowledge that despite very significant investment in that hospital, including, if we want to talk about staff, including staffing at the hospital increasing by over 1,200 since the end of December 2019. So there were 2,800 staff to over 4,000 now at the end of March. A 43% increase in staffing levels in University Hospital Limerick, including 162 more doctors, including 53 more hospital consultants, including 447 more nurses and midwives, and including 119 more health and social care professionals. These are very large numbers of additional people working on the front line. And despite their exceptional work and their hard efforts, I think many of us in this House, and I as Taoiseach, have significant concerns in relation to University Hospital Limerick, and we eagerly await the report from retired Chief Justice Frank Clark in terms of what I think will be very instructive recommendations in terms of how to proceed. More generally, you talk about the recruitment embargo, but a recruitment embargo would suggest nobody's being recruited. A recruitment embargo gives out the impression that staff numbers aren't growing in the health service. But of course, as you and I have discussed on many times over the last few weeks, they are. Because when you talk about an embargo, what you're actually talking about is asking the health service to increase more doctors, more nurses, more speech and language therapists, more occupational therapists, more people to work in the disability services, more people to work in our mental health services, and there'll be more people working in each of those areas at the end of this year than there were at the end of last year. But we're also saying there has to be some reality and some correlation between the funding given to any public organisation and the number of people they employ. So actually, for anybody watching it at home, please know this. This government has given the health service enough funding to hire 2,268 additional people this year. When you include disability services, which Minister Rabbitt has responsibility for, this government has provided funding to hire 3,000 additional people this year. So unless we want to adopt an approach that we bring the Minister for Justice in and say, you've no budget anymore, bring the Minister for Education and say, you don't have to worry about your budget anymore. Living within a budget and having some correlation in terms of a workforce plan and a budget is, I think a lot of taxpayers watching this see that's a responsible thing to do. In relation to overcrowding, yes, we have significant challenges, but we have seen in a number of hospitals very significant improvements over the course of this year and last year. And I think now what the Minister for Health with the HSE is eager to do is to see how you can embed the good practices in terms of patient flow into some of the hospitals, particularly UHL, which aren't going nearly as well.
You may well talk about living within budgets. I mean, you are hardly a poster boy for that. I quoted the 650 million a year on agency staff. I could also quote the 140 million a year on management and legal consultancy at peak in 2022. And heaven forbid that I would go near the 2.2 billion euros on your children's hospital that has yet to be delivered. So save the homily on living within budgets for someone else, Taoiseach. The facts are these. At University Hospital Limerick, and this matter was confirmed to the Oireachtas Committee, every single day there are patients who are deemed sick enough to require admission who cannot be admitted. That's the reality day on day. They do not have enough beds and they do not have the required level of staff. You quote a figure of 2,268 additional posts. You know full well in previous years that's been as high as 7,000. The system is stripped bare. I've set out the facts for you. And these are facts from people on the front line in terms of dental services, mental health capacity, all across the system, and yet you insist on this embargo. I've asked you to lift the embargo, and I put that to you again, Taoiseach, that needs to happen. By the way, It's foolish to imagine that this embargo is a money-saving device. It's not. And your spend on agency staff and outsourcing reflects that fact.
So am I to take from that that you don't believe there should be any cap on recruitment within the health service at all? You can hire whoever you want for whatever you want. Is that this week's Sinn Féin's health policy? Because if it is, can the Garda Commissioner hire whoever he wants? Can the Minister for Education? I'm just wondering where this ends. Because as a party that now aspires to be in government, you do have to actually every year tell people what you're going to do. So this year, we're very honestly,
you don't let young women die on trolleys or lying across chairs. That's what you don't do.
You're very clear. You're very well. I'm looking forward to
young women to die in a hospital lying on chairs. How's that for a policy?
No, please. Can we let the Taoiseach answer without interruption,
Of course, you don't actually develop policy. You just shout. What you actually need to do is explain to people how you reform the health service. Now, I thought we had an all-party agreement in this House called Sláintecare in terms of how you did it, and I thought you'd signed up to that as well. But if you think every single year you can just promise people everything and anything without actually showing them how it's going to be delivered. To people listening at home, please don't fall for the misinformation, the disinformation and the noise. Know this. 2,268 more people will be hired into the health service this year, and probably more than that. Know that when you include disability services, 3,000 people will be hired into the health service this year. That's important, and I'm quite sure when the National Children's Hospital is open, you'll want to be at the opening and you'll see how good it is for children's health in this country.
Thank you. Deputy Roisin Shortall, please.
Thanks, Ceann Corley.
Please.
Taoiseach, the details that emerged during the inquest of 16-year-old Aoife Johnson were horrific. She didn't need surgery. What she needed was an antibiotic. But instead of receiving the care she needed, she was left to die. On the night Aoife lay dying, one doctor was trying to manage 191 ED patients. Medics at the inquest described the ED that night as a war zone and grossly dangerous. Consultant Jim Gray described the ED that night as a death trap and said it is still a death trap. The Minister may have been taken aback by Dr. Gray's remarks, but I don't think anybody in the Midwest area was. UHL is consistently the most overcrowded hospital anywhere in the country. It is overcrowded all of the time. Today we learn that last month it had nearly twice as many patients on trolleys as the second most overcrowded hospital, which was CUH. The Health Minister himself has conceded that chronic overcrowding means the hospital is not safe. That's what a death trap means, Taoiseach. Unsafe. Taoiseach, I know you will tell me about the resources that have been invested into UHL, as you've just done now, and plans to increase capacity. But additional bed capacity is not coming on stream fast enough. A new 96-bed unit, which is really a 71-bed unit, will come on stream next year. Another 96-bed unit is to be delivered in 2028. That's if there are no delays. People in the Midwest can't wait that long, and they shouldn't have to. They don't have to. A fully operational 53-bed hospital in Limerick City, the landmark Barrington's Hospital, has just come on the market with a guide price of €12.5 million. This presents a unique opportunity for the government to act decisively and speedily to address at least part of the problem in UHL. Taoiseach, Aoife Johnson and many others were failed by the state. We can't fail any more people in that way. Will you tell us, was the government alerted in advance to the sale of Barrington's Hospital? Is the state considering buying the hospital, or is it investigating if this is an option? And finally, I'd ask, if the government is not interested in buying the hospital, then why not?
Thank you, Deputy Shortall. Taoiseach.
Well, I want to thank Deputy Shortall for raising this issue, and I certainly will not disagree with you in any way as to how disturbing testimony at the inquest was, and I do want to, conscious every time we discuss this issue in this House, and quite rightly so, I do want to be conscious of Aoife Johnston's family and want to express my deepest sympathies to her family who've been devastated by her loss. And my thoughts are with her family after what has been an unimaginably difficult and painful time. I did hear of some changes that have happened in the hospital I think are just worth putting on the record of this House briefly, because when the head of the HSE spoke yesterday in relation to the emergency department, he did talk about the fact that the number of doctors in the emergency department since the time of Aoife's death has gone from 26 to 47, the number of emergency consultants from 10 to 15, and the nurse staffing levels in the hospital have increased, in the emergency department, not only to safe staffing levels, but also to beyond that. I also want to be very clear that when it comes to all of our emergency departments across the health service, they are exempt from any recruitment pause or anything else in that space. I do fully accept there's an urgent need to inject more capacity into the health services in the Midwest. I'm truthfully not aware of the issue around Barrington's Hospital, but I will check for you. Because I think when people make constructive suggestions in this House, that's what they deserve to happen. So I will certainly talk to the Minister for Health in relation to that and see what his view and the view of the HSE is in relation to that. And I'm happy to come back to you directly in relation to that too. We have, as you acknowledged, and I take the point you say it needs to come on track even faster, we have already seen 150 new beds opened in the University of Limerick Hospital Group since January 2020. 98 of them are at the University Hospital Limerick. Work has now, as you've alluded to, commenced on a new 96-bed ward block last year. I'm told it's expected to be open next year. And this first block will add an additional 71 new acute beds to UHL, because, as you rightly say, the remaining 25 of the beds are replacing existing beds from the so-called Nightingale wards that require replacement and refurbishment to be in line with regulatory requirements. Preparatory work has also now commenced for a second 96-bed block. All steps are now being taken to accelerate that. All 96 beds in that second block will be additional for the hospital, comprising 48 medical beds and 48 surgical beds. The Minister did visit the hospital again recently. He met with doctors, he met with nurses, he met with senior managers, and he did announce a further package of, let's call them interim measures or quick measures, to try and provide capacity in a number of ways, including procuring community beds, 20 further step-down transition beds, rehab beds in County Clare, 16 additional fast-build beds, and the opening hours of the region's 3 acute medical assessment units at Nina, Ennis and St John's are due to be extended to 24/7 on a phased basis, and also providing GP and advanced nurse practitioner on-the-door services for the ED. And I say that by way of, I hope, conveying a view that government is doing everything and anything it can right now to try and expand capacity, both physical capacity in terms of beds and infrastructure, but also through alternative pathways of care.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Shortall.
Thanks, Taoiseach. Look, I'm not suggesting that acquiring Barrington's Hospital is going to solve all the problems, not by any means, but it will make a significant contribution to expanding capacity. It's an existing operating hospital and could be brought on stream very speedily. So I welcome the fact that you are to pursue that further. And I would also say that there are other critical things that need to happen, obviously, in relation to UHL. UHL Hospital Group is the only hospital group in the country that doesn't have a Model 3 hospital. And that has been a serious oversight over recent years. And I would ask that consideration now would be given to designating one of the other hospitals in the group as a level 3. And then a certain amount of ED work could be carried out in that other hospital if it had such a designation. Obviously, in relation to the recruitment embargo, that is having significant impacts on service delivery in UHL because of particular professions that don't have adequate numbers. And again, I would ask you to have a look at that, not just talk about global numbers. There are specific professions that need additional staff. So look, I just want to say I would hope that you would come back to us with a response on those 3 issues. Barrington's, the need for a level 3, a Model 3 hospital to be included in the group, because I think that would make a very significant difference, and also then in relation to the staffing embargo. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Corlett, and I certainly will come back to Deputy Shortall on those 3 issues, and I will liaise directly with the Minister for Health and revert to her then. I would just say on the recruitment issues, when we look, and I take the point about global figures and the need to make sure we don't just use global figures and we get under the bonnet. I do take that point, but I have endeavoured to do quite a bit of that in relation to UHL, and I do think by any objective standards the level of additional staff in UHL relative to even other hospitals has been significant. And that does lead me to raise 2 other issues that I raise, not to be provocative, but I do think also merit consideration. One is how the hospital actually operates. And I think there's serious issues in relation to that, and I think that's why we're sending a support team in. I think you're a believer in that too, that looking at all aspects of the hospital, I think that's important. And the second is, and I haven't checked on this in a few days, but I believe this hospital also has the lowest uptake, or certainly one of the various lowest uptakes of the new consultant contract. And I think the consultant contract has made a real difference in terms of separating public and private. And I think it is disappointing where you see some hospitals with a particularly low uptake level. So I'd add those as two other items to the three items that you've raised too.
Now, Deputy Peadar Tobin on behalf of the regional group.
Account Corlia. Taoiseach, in July 23, I asked the Minister for Justice how many asylum seekers were coming from Britain through the north of Ireland into the south of Ireland over the last 5 years. At that stage, about 66% of those making applications in the International Protection Office. The Minister stated in that parliamentary question that the question wasn't asked of the asylum seekers what routes they used to come into the country. Now, I thought this was a stunning answer, to be honest, that a minister in charge of this particular issue would not be asking basic questions of individuals coming into the country. I asked the same question in October 23, how asylum seekers were getting into the state, and the Minister for Justice did change the answer a little bit, but she told me that the information is not recorded. So I asked the same question again 2 weeks ago, and the Minister for Justice said, again, changed the answer a little bit, but said that it was not possible to extract that information from the data. Now, this is astonishing, that we would have a system where so many people are coming into the country, that they're applying in the International Protection Office, and that the Minister for Justice staff are not asking them how they come into the state. But it's not the only question that wasn't asked. After 14 migrants were found in a refrigerated container in Rosslare, just narrowly managing to escape with their life, I asked the Minister for Justice how many vehicles are checked at ports across the country. And the Minister said statistics are not available on the number of searches that are carried out on ports. I also asked the Minister for Justice how many applicants have gone missing in the state from the International Protection Office for the last 5 years. And again, incredibly, the Minister stated requested statistics are not recorded in a manner to allow for that information to be extracted. So for nearly 3 years, I've also been asking the question about how many people who've come into the country, who have had a deportation order made against them, have had that deportation order actioned. And incredibly, I've been told that 85% of those deportation orders over the last 5 years were never actioned. So I asked what happened to these people, and I was told that most of these people had voluntary deportation orders. So I asked them the question, was there any confirmation that these people had left the country? And the Minister said, no, we have no facility at the ports of exit to be able to confirm in relation to the exit of these individuals. And that in some cases, the Garda Síochána may have information about this, but they were not able to confirm that either, and that was in the parliamentary question. So shockingly, we have this crisis on our hands that has been developing over the last number of years, and a large part of that crisis is because that the Minister for Justice does not know what's happening within the department. Now, I think that's incredible. It's led, obviously, to, I believe, a significant increase in this year in the number of people coming into the country. It's led into a situation where we had the Taoiseach rebuking the Minister for Justice, contradicting the Minister for Justice this week, and now it's also led to a breakdown of relationships with the British government. Now, there's emergency legislation happening in relation to this. The emergency legislation, I understand, is to allow for people to be returned to Britain. The British government are refusing to accept that they're going to apply that legislation, and they say that it can't be enforced. How are you going to make the British accept the new returns policy in that legislation?
Taoiseach, please.
So I just reject out of hand your hypothesis in relation to our migration situation in this country. The reason we've seen a very significant increase in people coming not just to Ireland but right across the European Union is multifold, and none of them have anything to do with the name of the Minister for Justice of any country. That's very clear, and I think anybody with any understanding of migration patterns across the European Union, Ireland, war in Ukraine and the likes would very quickly arrive at that conclusion, but that doesn't make for a good social media video. The Minister has taken a number of actions that have very significantly improved in real time our migration system. And we've had to improve it in real time because we've gone from a relatively small number of people, a few thousand every year, to a much larger number of people, coupled on top of that with the Ukrainian humanitarian response. And if you look at the work that has been done in relation to processing times, and we know that faster processing times is the most effective way of making sure you can provide certainty to those who have a right to be here, because migration, by the way, is a good thing, certainty to those who have a right to be here and integrate those people in your community, but also say to those who don't have a right to be here, you don't have a right to be here and you need to leave. That faster processing times the world over, we know, is the key to making progress. Also, decisions that the Minister's made in relation to the designation of countries as safe countries, and indeed the very significant decision that was made by her in recent days around the country from which we see the highest proportion of people going on a fast acceleration list in terms of processing. I've no doubt that country happens to be Nigeria, and currently I've no doubt that over the next number of months that will see significant progress, freeing up 100 Gardaí who were doing desk jobs in terms of immigration and being able to put them on the front line in terms of working with the PSNI and also working on issues like deportations will make a very, very real difference. We live on an island that has an open border. I think every party in this House values that, agrees with it, and I think the overwhelming majority of people in this country do as well. It's important for peace, it's important for prosperity, and it's absolutely something that we all cherish and guard. That does mean we don't count the number of people that come over the border on an hourly, daily or ever basis. That is not the same thing as suggesting that we don't see trends that appear in the International Protection Office. And I think it is a responsible minister doing their job well who actually decides to have an informed debate on migration, to put that information into the public domain. Anything less would have been irresponsible, because we now know that instead of people just saying, what about the airport, what about the airport, what about the airport, which used to be the mantra in here for a few months, we can now actually realise, well, hang on, it's not just about the airport. It's not just about passport checks. It's not just about Gardaí on the foots of planes, so all of that's happened. It's also about actually saying, how do we work more closely with the PSNI and the Gardaí? How do we work more closely under the common travel area, something that we really value with the UK and they value with us and has been there for such a long time? How do we work together in relation to that as well? In relation to deportations, we've seen a very significant increase in deportations. In fact, we've seen 173 people depart the state under various mechanisms up to the 26th of April as well. We have biometric processing done of everybody who comes to our International Protection Office. And in relation to the United Kingdom, may I say this, all we're simply looking to do is clarify our own laws to enforce an agreement that's already in place. And I'm very proud to lead a government that honours its agreements, and I expect our nearest neighbours will do the same.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Tobin.
First of all, one of the basic tenets of management is to measure what's happening. If you can't measure what's happening, you can't manage the situation. If I was to open up a sweet shop in Main Street in Bray, I would need to know what's happening within that sweet shop, otherwise it would go bust. Okay? So the fact that over the last number of years, despite myself and maybe others trying to get the minister to focus on measuring what's happening, there has been a refusal. Up until 2 weeks ago, the last question I got from the department is, we are not able to extract that information from the data. Now that is a flashing neon light saying incompetency. It's what it is, Minister. And you mentioned about the deportations. Over 7,000 applications that have been refused in the last year. Only fewer than 100 of those have seen a deportation. And we saw last week under the Dublin 3 regulations that just out of 3 out of 188 decisions were transferred. So the question I have here, we have a piece of legislation that's never actually been used before. We've changed we're going to amend the legislation, and yet the British are still refusing to accept that they're going to accept returns. I'm asking you, how do you enforce that? Simply, just how do you enforce it? Because otherwise, that piece of emergency legislation is a distraction from fixing the situation.
Taoiseach, please.
So I think you have a better understanding of how to run the sweet shop in Bray than the migration policies, because this minister does measure metrics and talks to this House in relation to them. I come in and buy a lollipop from you in Bray, but listen, processing times down, deportations up, numbers of countries on the safe country list up, more Gardaí being freed up, working with our European colleagues, who's recognising that this island on its own can't solve migration. You have to have effective policies in place around returns, which is a word I don't like, by the way, when you're talking about human beings, but you have to have effective agreements in place across the European Union. Like when I go to the European Council, these are the sort of issues that people right across Europe are actually talking about, working together to make sure that we have effective plans in place. In relation to the UK, and I have no interest at all in this country being used as a pawn in relation to British politics. We have an agreement in place. It's called a standard operating proceeding for processing and transferring asylum seekers between the UK and Ireland. It's been in place, stop interrupting me, it's been in place since 2020. It sets out the procedure. It's an operational guide. It's rooted in the following legislation of this country: the International Protection Act 2015 and Part 18 of the Withdrawal of the UK from the EU, Consequential Provisions Act 2020, which you may or may not have voted for.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And in the UK, 2 pieces of legislation: the Immigration Rules, Part 11, the Asylum and Immigration Treatment of Claimants Act 2004. Countries should honour agreements they sign up to, and this country will honour ours.
Thank you very much. We move now to Deputy Richard O'Donoghue on behalf of the Rural Independent Group.
Thank you, Ciaran. And Ciaran, I'm going to take you back to my first maiden speech, and you were actually in the chair when I first made a speech. My first maiden speech was on UHL Hospital in Limerick. What disappoints me, it's taken 4 years for the opposition to finally stand up and join me over UHL. 4 years it's taken to stand up officially and say about UHL. And now, again, because it's an election, they're all now jumping all over us. Social Democrats today have mentioned UHL. I haven't heard you mention it once since I've been in here. Sinn Féin are at it again now today. And I've asked, again, 4 years on my maiden speech, I've asked for help, and I wasn't helped. I'm going to give you a small history lesson on UHL. Jessica Sheedy, 18 years of age, went into UHL on the 8th of May 2018, and she died in UHL on the 11th. Aoife Johnson went into UHL at 16 years of age and died in UHL. That is the record of this Dáil of fixing a problem in UHL. The only way you're going to fix UHL is start at the top. And I've asked for the resignation of the CEO at the start. And I don't believe any medical person should be in charge of any hospital. There should be a business person with a board set up of all medical across the board. And why do I want a CEO to be a business person? Because they're not conflicted, because they're not giving the job to their buddies, they can't do the job. They're not protecting their buddies when they don't do their job. If you put in a person as a CEO that's private, that is accountable to the board of all medical staff, you can fire them if they don't get results. That's been the problem in UHL and all other hospitals that haven't performed properly, is the person at the top can't be fired. That is the problem. You want to fix it, I'm giving you the solution. Put a business person that's accountable to the people of Ireland. Put a medical staff that's accountable to the person that's in charge. And if the board doesn't do their job, they're held accountable by a person that's not conflicted within the medical circles. That has been the problem. The person, the CEO that was appointed as the UHL, was appointed by Leah Varadkar. That's who she was appointed by. That's the person. Also, that person was involved in the Galway scandal, when there was a scandal in Galway over a person dying and paperwork gone missing. No accountability has been the problem here.
Deputy, please, now, you're...
This is public record and written on the papers, Chair.
It might be, but you're getting into extremely dangerous territory. We're not entitled to make any accusations or implications in respect of the professionalism of any individual,
Okay, Chair.
whether leading a hospital or any other professional.
Okay. But also, Chair, on that, and I will take whatever comes down the line on this. We have people dying in that hospital. If it was your daughter or son, would you be sitting here and pulling me on the same thing? Would you? 4 or 5 years down the line, no change.
Thank you, Deputy.
2 young people have died, no change. That's the problem with UHL.
The time is up. Taoiseach.
Well, thanks very much, Ciaran Corla, and thank you to Deputy Donoghue for raising an issue that he clearly and understandably feels very passionate on, without wishing to make opposition parties feel uncomfortable in this House. I don't doubt that all parties in this House raise this issue on a regular basis, and I don't doubt the bona fides of anybody on any side of this House in relation to wanting to see progress in healthcare and wanting to see progress in relation to UHL. And I think that should be our starting point in terms of any civil debate or discussion that we have. What I do agree with you on is the broader point about the fact that doctors in this country are regulated, the nurses in this country are regulated, many other allied healthcare professionals are regulated through CORU, and they all have various accountability structures if something goes wrong. And I don't think in any scenario that the role of management should be discounted. I agree on that much. I'm talking more broadly than any specific case. So I share a view that there's many parts to the health service. There's the clinical care, there's the responsibility of government around capacity, resources, policy, I get that. But there's also the responsibility of those that are paid a very decent wage on a day-to-day basis to do their job too. And I think any fair look at any situation in the health service has to look at all the aspects. What I certainly have no doubt about in relation to UHL is that alongside the very harrowing and disturbing evidence that was heard at Aoife Johnston's inquest, we will now see the Frank Clark report, and I believe that's due in the next few weeks. I believe the hope of government is that it's due this month. And the fact that the most senior judge, formerly the most senior judge, a former Chief Justice, is carrying out that report, I hope gives you an indication of how seriously we take this issue. Because yes, and you've heard colleagues talk about this and question me on this today, yes, there's an issue around bed capacity in the Midwest, accepted. We need to continue to grow it. We need to all look at innovative ways to do that and do that quickly, and we are. Yes, there's a need to continue to grow the workforce in UHL, and contrary to some charges in this House, that is happening and will continue to happen. But there's also a need to look at, I think, pathways within the Midwest, and I think how you use all of the various parts of capacity, to help serve the people of the Midwest. And then there's also the need that alongside all of those to know that with all of those extra resources, with extra beds, with extra staff, with improved pathways, that the place is being well run and safely run. And I think the Frank Clark report, I think it would be foolish of any of us to prejudge it. I have no knowledge of what's in it. But I can certainly tell you this, we're going to take it very seriously, because you don't send a retired former Chief Justice in to do a job and then not take any recommendations that flow from that very seriously.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And I do hope that what you're saying is that Jessica Sheedy will not have died in vain, that there will be somebody else's life saved. But 2018, now we're talking about Aoife Johnston. Where are we going? There has to be accountability within the hospital system. The other thing you've got to look at, how much has been spent in legal cases, fighting these cases and more over stuff that could have been fixed in the last 5 years if people put up their hands and said, sorry. Fiona Gloucester came out the other day and said, listen, I'm sorry. It's the first time they've actually said sorry. Anyone can make a mistake, but if you learn from the mistake, we're moving forward. But the mistakes have been covered up, and legal bills, 50 and 60 million being spent on budgets that you're talking about that could be done in improving the hospital system. UHL was the best hospital, training hospital in this country. My own sister trained there many years ago and she's now retired. It was the best. Now people go anywhere bar there because they're afraid and in fear of their life. That's not right for any person to avoid a hospital, saying that they mightn't get the care, or they mightn't get, when they get in, they get the care they need. But to get them into where they need the care is the problem.
I think there's a couple of issues you've pointed to there. I think the first is that I think we all are very proud of the work being done by staff in the hospital, and I think you're right to make that point. Staff working at the front line in UHL are doing extraordinarily good and important work, providing the very best care that they possibly can to the people of the Midwest, and not in any way, shape or form moving away from the very difficult and painful situations that have arisen in that hospital. I do want to just acknowledge that there's many people who have very excellent outcomes thanks to the dedication of the care. I think, and we intend, by the way, to continue to grow the number of people working in the hospital. There's no recruitment embargo in relation to emergency departments and the population there. And when you look objectively at the number of people that now work in the hospital versus a couple of years ago, the budget of the hospital now versus a couple of years ago, the bed capacity of the hospital now versus a couple of years ago, all of those have moved in the right way. And I accept, though, we need to move more quickly on that, and we need to be innovative and challenge ourselves in relation to interim solutions. And more broadly on the issue of open disclosure and when things go wrong, I do think we've legislated in this House through the Patient Safety Bill to try and create that culture that people don't, that people can actually, when an incident, I'm not talking about a specific one, when an incident happens, that people can share information, admit mistakes and engage in open disclosure. But there is a need for accountability.
Leaders' questions for today. We move now to questions of policy or legislation. Deputy Mary Lou McDonald, please.
The British Government's Legacy Act is a cynical and a callous attempt to block victims and